Captain and Tennille with their number one hit from 1975, Love Will Keep Us Together. For decades, that song seemed to symbolize the marriage and musical partnership of Daryl Dragon and our guest today, Toni Tennille. Sadly, neither that professional or personal relationship would last, and these are explored in Miss Tennille's new memoir, published just last month. Toni Tennille, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
You know, this book comes at a unique time in your life, and I'm sure fans were hoping you'd write an autobiography for a while now, but if you were to have written this, say, 10 years ago, well, it'd be a very different ending to the book.
Yeah, it would have, and, you know, about 10 years ago or more was when fans and friends were saying, well, are you going to write a memoir? And, you know, I'm old enough, three-quarters of a century, so I've certainly had a life, but I told them no, and I meant it, mainly because I hadn't figured out what I was going to do about my marriage to Daryl. And it took me a very, very long time. Most of the time I lived in Prescott, Arizona, just before I moved here to Florida, to decide what I was going to do. And then once I did decide to go ahead, with the help of lots of support from my friends and my family and a wonderful therapist there in Prescott, to divorce Daryl, then I felt, well, I've made the decision, and I could write something, but I wouldn't write it by myself because
right.
I didn't want a co-author or anybody didn't know me that I didn't know. So my niece Caroline happens to be a very, very fine writer, and she agreed to work with me. So we worked together. It took us 2 years to write it. But the main thing I wanted to do in the book, and one of the main reasons it took me so long to make up my mind, was that I knew how disappointed our fans would be, especially the ones who, you know, had been our fans forever, since the 70s, since we first broke, and, you know, thought of us as the perfect couple, and love will conquer all, and all that sort of stuff. And when I did decide to divorce Daryl, I wanted those people to at least hear how I came to that decision, and they could agree with me or not. You know, they could say, no, I wouldn't have done that, or, you know, I can see why she did that.
Right.
But it gave me a chance to lay it out for them.
I read an interview with you recently, and you said that despite the divorce, you and Daryl are on pretty good terms.
Oh, we're on great terms. I just talked to him yesterday. I talk to him at least every week or 10 days to see how he's doing, and we chat and we talk about, we have a business together. We still own our publishing company together, and so we do have business together. And but I care about him. I really do. I want him to be okay. I always hoped that I could bring him out of this internal churning of negativity and that he was in his whole life. And I thought I could do it because I was raised in a family that was very loving, very supportive, and I thought, you know, I can help this guy. He's a genius, but I can bring him out so he can do even more wonderful things. And I couldn't.
Isn't that always the way, though? People get into relationships with someone and there are some problems and the person's maybe not right for them, but you say in your head, you know what? I can change this person. That's going to be my life's mission. And I don't know, has anyone ever been successful at that? I don't think they have.
You know, and I knew that. You know, I knew it, but I thought I was different. So the lesson of this is, no matter how well-intentioned you are, you can never change a person fundamentally. Now, the good thing about Daryl is that I always knew that he was he would be true to me as I was to him all those years. He was not the kind of guy to go philandering. I mean, he barely wanted to socialize, so, you know, I knew he wouldn't do anything like that. But the great thing was that the music that we did, because, of course, I would pour out my heart, my feelings about him in the songs that I wrote, in the lyrics, and I worked very hard to make sure the lyrics were just right, like The Way I Want to Touch You and Do That to Me One More Time, and several other songs that you can find on our various albums. But the funny thing was, some years later, I found out that he never paid any attention to the lyrics at all. He didn't know what I was saying, and he didn't even realize it. All this time I thought, well, I can't really say it to him because he's never said anything like that to me. So I'll just write these songs, and that way he'll know. But he never did. But what we were able to do with each other, he was my muse, so to speak, because the joy of when I would write a song, or we would take a song that we'd chosen together, and he would turn it into this wonderful pop record. We had that great gift. I think he was inspired to do his best work. And then, of course, I was inspired because I knew that he understood me. The one thing I knew was that he thought I was a great singer, and he thought I was a really fine songwriter. So when I play a new song I'd come up with for him, he would, I could tell right away he thought it was really wonderful, and he'd go to work on it. But in his own way, I mean, you had to really read, you had to read beneath the mask, I guess you could say, to know what Daryl was thinking.
Captain and Tennille with The Way I Want to Touch You, a number 4 hit in 1975. Our guest today is Toni Tennille, and her book is Toni Tennille, a memoir. Now, I know that Daryl Dragon was a good friend of Beach Boy Dennis Wilson.
Yes.
And I know that the both of you toured with the Beach Boys, right?
That's right. Daryl actually got me the gig. Actually, I hired him first. I had written a musical, an ecology musical, back in 1969 at South Coast Repertory called Mother Earth. And just to make a long story as short as possible, it was reviewed with rave reviews by all the trades and local papers when we debuted it. And then we made a deal with a professional producer, and we're doing the show up in San Francisco. We needed a new keyboard player to go down with us to L.A., and Daryl was recommended to me, and he was off. The Beach Boys were taking some time off. He'd been with them for about 5 or 6 years as a backup musician.
Right.
So he flew up to San Francisco to meet me after he had heard a recording of the songs I had written and me singing it. And he auditioned for him, and I immediately hired him. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind he was exactly right. And I was very intrigued by him, his manner, because I've always been I've always liked men who are kind of geeks and nerds. It's just always been my thing.
You've just given hope to so many guys. You have
honestly, my favorite TV program is The Big Bang Theory. I just love those guys, and I understand them. I think kind of, and actually, if anybody watches The Big Bang Theory, Amy and Sheldon are me and Daryl.
Oh.
Except that Sheldon talks more than Daryl does. But it's the same thing. And I'm Amy, always dreaming, always thinking, oh, he's going to turn around one day. He's going to, declare his love. And, of course, he hasn't yet.
Right.
I don't know if he ever will. But anyway, Daryl struck me as being deep and mysterious and, maybe down there was troubled a little bit, and I didn't really know much about him at that time. I just thought, wow, this is the kind of guy I'm pretty interested in. And anyway, then when the Beach Boys got ready to go back on the road, they needed an acoustic piano player because their regular one was going to take time off to get his degree. So Carl Wilson called him and said, who do you know that could do this? And Daryl said, well, I got this gal. She can certainly do it. And Carl said, okay, we'll go ahead and use her. And he never heard me play. Huh. He was just taking Daryl's, word for it. And he never flinched at the fact that I was a girl, and that they were the Beach Boys,
right.
which I thought was so wonderful that he didn't care. And, of course, the first time he ever heard me play was when we did sound check for our first concert. And I passed the test, but it was a little scary for me because I didn't want to disappoint him, and I didn't want Daryl to feel bad because he'd recommended me. But anyway, it was a fabulous experience. And yes, Dennis, who was the youngest of the Wilson brothers,
yes,
and Daryl, Dennis was a fine songwriter. He was very overshadowed, of course, by Brian.
Sure.
and I think that was really, really hard for him. And also, he didn't have the ability to write his music down so that others could play it, or you could make parts for a band or something like that. But Daryl could do that. And in fact, Daryl actually wrote a couple of songs with Dennis. He contributed lyrics or something, I don't know.
Right.
One of which we recorded, which was Cuddle Up, that Dennis wrote.
It's a wonderful song.
It's a wonderful song. And I would sit there and watch Dennis play these incredible chords and things that he would just find somehow on the piano, not really knowing, technically, musically, what he was doing. So Daryl spent hours with him at the piano writing down the things that Dennis would write.
And of course, Captain and Tennille recorded songs written by another Beach Boy, Bruce Johnston.
Oh, listen,
Yeah.
Bruce is actually one of the finest contemporary songwriters I ever knew. I couldn't believe, everybody knows I write the songs, and that was a really good song, and we did record it. But there were some like Disney Girls, some like Thank You, Baby, Don't Be Scared, all these, If There Were Time, which we recorded with a symphony orchestra. He was just amazing. Of course, he was a cranky old guy, and he used to drive me nuts, but because he would always have something critical to say about me and Daryl. You're too old, you'll never get a record deal. Nobody's ever going to be able to pronounce Tennille, and fortunately we ignored him. But people didn't like Wagner either. He was kind of a crank bottle. Yet he wrote this beautiful music. So.
Of course, I'd like to play a song that you wrote right now. From 1977, this is Circles. The Captain and Tennille with Circles. On the Vintage Rock and Pop Shop, our guest today is Toni Tennille. I sometimes think of Captain and Tennille as working in the same milieu as the Carpenters. Did you ever run into Karen Carpenter in your career?
Well, yeah, because Karen and Richard and Daryl and I were both at A&M at the same time.
Ah.
Karen and Richard had been there, of course, much longer, and they'd already had many, many hits for the label by that time we got there. And Richard, I never saw. I never talked to him. He was always running around into the studio doing whatever. He was in there forever working. Mm-hmm. Karen, I would see on the campus. It was the old Charlie Chaplin Studios was where A&M was located. So it was kind of like a little college campus, kind of. And I would see her, and we would chat from time to time. And she was shy, and she was quiet, and she was kind of reserved. But she felt comfortable about talking to some things with me, and we became friendly. Richard, I never knew. And I don't even think Daryl ever saw Richard, and he didn't see Karen. But Karen, I think Richard and Daryl were kind of alike in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But Karen and I did become friendly, not friends.
Would you say there were a lot of musical similarities with the Carpenters?
Well, not really, because Karen and Richard, we really had very different styles. Ours was a lot, Daryl.
Right.
Daryl, and also I am a different kind of singer. Karen is just, her voice is smooth and beautiful, like a cello. I always, compared her voice to a cello. And Richard did these absolutely exquisite perfection arrangements for all of their tunes, and he wrote some of them as well.
Yes.
But Daryl and I think we had a little funkier style in a lot of our stuff.
A little peppier.
And Daryl was a boogie fan, so he would slip that in whenever he could. And so I think that we had a different thing. I was comfortable singing Motown-y type things like Shop Around, and she wouldn't do that. She couldn't do that. So, but we had the similar vocal range. So that was one thing that was similar, and then it was kind of cute to watch people get screwed up when they thought that Daryl and I were brother and sister because Karen and Richard were.
Right, of course.
You're the married. No, we're the married ones. They're the brother and sister.
Well, as we start to run out of time here, it's a shame. I could go into so many things like Pink Floyd and all that.
Oh yeah.
But I want to ask you actually about Singing Standards, the Great American Songbook. Was this because you started playing piano as a very little girl? Was this a first love for you, this music?
Well, I studied classical piano for 10 years. I started when I was 7 years old and went on until I finished high school. But my dad was a big band singer with Bob Crosby and his Bobcats in the late 1930s.
Wow.
And he literally raised me and my sister Jane, because we're very close in age, on that music. I mean, he had to give up show business and take over the family furniture store when his father died at a very young age. And that just broke his heart because he loved what he was doing. But he would come home every day with an LP or whatever he had, and we'd go out in the room where the hi-fi was and sit down, and he'd say, now wait till you hear this. And he'd play Count Basie, or he'd play Sarah Vaughan, or he'd play Woody Herman. He had all these fabulous, and of course Frank Sinatra, and he had all these fabulous albums he'd play for us every day. So that was the music that I literally fell in love with, because it was in my memory, and it always makes me think of my father, of course.
And you've recorded several albums. I
did, and you know, that brought into my life my other muse, and that was the great arranger Sammy Nestico, who is legendary among arrangers. And we met when he used to arrange a standard for me on every Captain and Tennille show. I always did a Gershwin tune or something. He is he's 92 now, still writing, still arranging. He is a man who is full of joy, just full of the joy of music. A complete opposite from Daryl. He's open. He'll cry if he hears something, sweet or some song he loves. He's just, and he and I were always joined at the heart, we used to say, still are. And so that period when I sang with the symphonies and the big bands for several decades, and, after Captain and Tennille had slowed down, Sammy did my entire symphony book, my entire big band book, and he was just a dear man to be around. So I had two completely different kinds of muses.
Yeah.
I had Daryl and I had Sammy, but both were wonderful in their own way.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to chat with us. Once again, the book is Toni Tennille, a memoir. And if we ever have a part 2 of this, I hope we can get to that Pink Floyd story. People just have
great.
They'll have to read the book.
I'd also like to mention, too, that I did record the audiobook, and it's been out since the actual book has been out. So if anybody would like to hear me read it into their headphones, they can get the audiobook.
Oh, that's right. Yep, and I guess you can get that at all the Amazon or
right. Yeah. It's Audible Audio is the one that produced it for me. So
and a website for you.
Well, the best way for people to talk to me is on my Facebook page, because I read everything that people post, and I try to write on it, answer them every day, at least once, sometimes twice a day. It's on Facebook, The Real Toni Tennille. Has to be The Real Toni Tennille, because there is a Toni Tennille, and it's not me. Somebody got it before I did. And also on Twitter, I'm at Toni Tennille. You can find me on Twitter.
Well, again, it was a great joy to speak with you, and I'm so glad we got a chance to do this. And, we'll look forward to the next book. You've got a lot of years ahead of you, so there'll be Memoir 2 coming at some point.
I'm not sure there will be that, but there will be other collaborations with me and Caroline, I can tell you that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. You have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. You too.